is open and we encourage you to contribute your thoughts, questions and insights there as we move through the event. If we encounter any technical difficulties and our call is unexpectedly ended or interrupted, don't panic and we will just rejoin the session in the same link again and pick up where we left off. So to begin, let me explain very briefly how and why today's session will run. In our panel, we have brought together experts from all over the world to give a snapshot insight into their work and perspective on the potential of culture, arts, education practices to nurture social and emotional learning skills. Our discussion panel focuses on two main themes. The first is social sculpture, arts and crafts activities in social care and health contexts. In this section, you'll hear from researchers and practitioners in the field of teaching artistry, also known as socially engaged arts, community arts, or participatory arts, depending on your country and context. And we'll discuss strategies for effective social impact practices as we interact with institutions by ways of artistic methods and approaches. And secondly, we'll look at integrating artistic practices into humanitarian programs in vulnerable and armed conflict settings. Here, our speakers will discuss, through their projects, some of the major issues that affect the implementation of their programs and artistic cultural activities. We'll discuss the importance of recognizing community arts and these methodologies as a powerful tool to improve reconciliation and well-being, particularly through empowerment. To this end, we will also leave the call open for 10 or 15 minutes additionally at the end to offer space for a short Q&A with our speakers. So if you're able, we encourage you to stay and engage there. Obviously, an hour is not enough time to hear in depth from all the massive array of teaching artist practitioners and projects happening across the world. But our goal for this session is to share snapshots into the work, practices, potential, and challenges of those currently operating in this space. And most importantly, to encourage us all as we move through the summit next week to have these and the potential of this work, if properly funded and supported at an international level, at the front of our minds. As we imagine the next 10 years, it's essential to place a bigger emphasis on the power of teaching artistry as a tool for authentic and sustainable change. As you'll see, these kinds of projects are already happening all over the world, and they've been quietly making change under the radar for decades. However, with the many humanitarian crises we're facing, it's never been so important to get serious and specific about how we connect, fund, and deploy these practices at an international level. As you hear about projects we'll share, imagine what would happen if UNESCO and our cultural ministers backed them with full force. Imagine the impact and the outcome which would be possible. With this in mind, we'll share all of the following. The work is already happening. We need now specifics about how it can be internationally supported and deployed with support from UNESCO. I have the pleasure of speaking to you today as the director of ITAC, depending on your country, which is the international network for teaching artists and those who undertake social impact work through the arts. We are made up of more than 5,000 practitioners from more than 45 countries and have 4 national hubs, and it's all growing quickly. I deal every day with people who are carrying out amazing social change projects through the arts, largely unsupported at government level, and I'm tasked partly with figuring out new ways to strengthen international connections among our sector and beyond. I know firsthand the kinds of impact our sector creates in health settings, armed conflict spaces, humanitarian spaces, and beyond. Our reach and our impact is significant, and yet currently receives almost no international targeted support funding. So let me take a step back for a minute, and for those new to the concept, just very briefly explain what we mean when we discuss teaching artistry and socially engaged arts. So, teaching artistry is an entire sector of people working, I would suggest, in almost every city in the world to use arts as a tool for social transformation. The goal of this workforce is not to create more artists, although that can happen. It's to use arts as the intervention method to achieve other, more socially driven goals. This can look, for example, like dance being used as a way to rehabilitate child soldiers and help them explore their bodily autonomy again as they reintegrate back into communities. It could be theatre as a way to challenge assumptions and explore different perspectives in polarized communities. Music as a way to communicate non-verbally in spaces where marginalized communities struggle to be heard, or visual arts as a way to document and reflect on trauma and begin a healing process. These are just a handful of examples to articulate what we mean when we describe this practice. Teaching artistry is not the same thing as being an art teacher, although there can be overlap. It's its own sector, devoted to unpacking social issues through artistic mediums. You'll hear today from people working in this way to craft and reinvigorate social structures. As you do, I ask you to remember that an international network already exists, supporting and uplifting this practice, and we are primed and hungry to make impact. Imagine what would be possible if funding was available to scale and organize and enhance these efforts. So, to take us forward and introduce the speakers who'll be sharing about the work and impact where this is already happening, I'll pass over to Albane.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. Hello, everyone. So in this first panel, after Madeleine, Teresa and Sarah will introduce the Hamas project in Portugal. Then we'll hear from Anita and Rita Irwin, who will introduce the Tiny Orange Shirt project, a response to the history of residential schools in Canada. Then Joanna Krzemińska will present a community-based arts education project in Turkey and Germany. Ruth Mateus Berr will present Desmart's research practice in the case of the Walker Parade, and Melanie Sarantou will discuss activism and activism practice in projects such as Hamas and textile cartography. So for the Teresa video, a sense of belonging.
Este contacto convosco foi muito bom e os trabalhos que se fizeram foi uma mais-valia. Eu falo por mim porque estive em contacto com a Juliana e com o Carlos e, portanto, quando viram a questão das fotografias, o material que eles nos acederam foi muito bom.
Por mim estavam cá todos os dias.
Okay.
Tanto para nós, técnicos, é uma mais-valia absorver alguma coisa de fora, como para eles terem esta injeção de coisas novas.
A entregar-se, a estar disposto a fazer praticamente tudo aquilo que lhe era pedido sem estar a questionar. Havia uma sinceridade mesmo bonita, que vem de dentro, havia disponibilidade.
E mesmo aqueles que não querem fazer ou que não têm tanta disposição para algumas atividades estavam super motivados e entusiasmados. E portanto, a própria relação entre o grupo foi muito positiva. Eles trabalharam sempre todos juntos. Foi muito feliz. Foi uma semana muito feliz.
have also the pleasure to hear a little bit Melanie Sarantou about the AMAS project. But now let's hear a quick view from Anita and Rita Irwin about the Tiny Orange Shirt project.
So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. As is our practice in Canada, we begin with an acknowledgement of where we come from as we visit with you today. We live and work on traditional, unceded, and ancestral territories of the Musqueam peoples in Vancouver, and we are privileged to share in these places, and we recognize the importance of attending to the histories, stories, and futures of Indigenous peoples with responsibility, care, and reconciliation.
With the conference themes of culture and art education, our presentation engages with traditional crafting practices, crocheting and storytelling with wool. By making alongside a Canadian community movement called the Tiny Orange Shirt Project, we discuss how art can become a space to retrace Indigenous settler relations and reimagine conceptions of land and culture, and engage in everyday processes of reconciliation, grounded by the 4 R's of Indigenous learning. And those are relevance, respect, reciprocity, and responsibility.
These are difficult stories, and so we begin with multiple story strands. Past stories, why make tiny orange shirts? Our stories, what is happening in Canada and how are we in relation? And future stories, an invitation to mobilize and to contribute. And so we begin by looking back.
This is a Canadian research project that is taking steps towards the decolonization of education and to incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing across different disciplines and educational settings, including a community-engaged project where individuals are invited to create tiny orange shirts. On September 30th, 2013, Phyllis Webstead, herself a residential school survivor, shared her story of wearing her grandmother's gift of a new orange shirt to school. Those representing the Mission Oblates made her take the orange shirt off. That was in 1973. Phyllis metaphorically used her orange shirt story to represent all that was lost by Indigenous and Métis students who attended residential schools. This is a truth about Canada. At the University of British Columbia, the project was initiated by 2 art educators, Shannon Leddy and Laurie Miller, to provide an opportunity to stand with Indigenous people and to recognize their loss and pain. It is offered as a way for healing, and it is an invitation to pre-service and in-service educators to think beyond text when considering meaningful and respectful ways to work with Indigenous histories and voices. Today, there is an art installation in our own Faculty of Education building, where there are hundreds of contributions from students, staff, and faculty.
And we are dedicated to remembering this historical legacy of government-sponsored racism, discrimination, and that together with the church-run residential and day schools, devastated First Nations communities through policies that instituted systematic cultural genocide, resulting in 3,200 children dying in these schools since Confederation in 1867 to the late 1990s, according to the Truth and Reconciliation Report of 2015. As we learn more, the numbers are projected to be much higher. The actual number may never be known. This is a truth about Canada. According to the report, children in residential schools died at rates higher than non-Aboriginal students, and that successive governments, although advised of the implications of its policies and presented with options, failed to provide adequate funding, medical treatment, nutrition, housing, sanitation, and clothing, which directly contributed to this elevated death rate. Even more horrific, the report confirms that child neglect was institutionalized, and that the lack of supervision created situations where students were prey to sexual and physical abusers. It is important to note that our current Prime Minister deemed to spend the first Truth and Reconciliation Day in 2021 on holidays with his family, despite numerous invitations from First Nations communities to visit. And remember, children forgotten by the very state his government represents. This is a truth about Canada. QR dissemination is a process of meshworking ideas and a woolly experiment that is now underway, with each iteration an opportunity for further conversation. May we make together
and raise our hands in respect and make this a truth about Canada. Thank you for sharing this time with us, and we would welcome your tiny orange shirts should you wish to participate.
So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna Krzemińska, and I'm active as artist, researcher, and curator. And I will speak about the potentials and challenges of community-based arts education programs in Turkey and Germany. I have been accompanying different civil society actors and their arts education projects in Istanbul, Berlin, and some surrounding cities, which have been launched to enhance the equal opportunities and social educational participation of children with refugee and host communities. And on the left side of each slide, you can see some impressions of some of the projects and also the names and web pages if you are interested to follow. Next slide. So despite the different frame conditions, organizational structures, and arts education practices, I could see that the civil society actors pursued some common values and approaches which enable local change and empowerment. Namely, they were predominantly providing holistic solutions to education, which means that they were involving the families of the children and young people, and they were also open to enter into new cooperations and alliances to meet the everyday realities, experiences, and needs of the participants and communities involved. Moreover, all of them understood the realization of a project as a process of mutual learning. They included the local partners and communities from the beginning and at eye level in the realization of the measures and process design. And the focus was put in this sense on the potentials, creativity, and resourcefulness of the participants who could experience the co-creation as identity establishing and self-empowering, and were willing to invest in the process and to give back. And least, in my opinion, the most important point is that the commitment went also far beyond the sole realization of the project offers. Special emphasis was also placed on the value of building trustful relations and a strong community, which means also that there was a strong commitment to engage against the institutional and structural exclusion of the community members involved. Next. So, however, even if there is a not underestimated number of projects and initiatives in Turkey and Germany, which have the great potential to advance inclusive communities and the social and educational participation of refugee children, studies show that there are underlying dynamics and founding logics which impede the local work of the actors on the ground and carry forward marginalization and exclusion in the field. So in Germany, critical voices of civil society actors and research have been increasingly being raised, stressing that the fields of arts and culture have proved to be resistant regarding the current forced migration and refugee movements and continuously reproduce hegemonic relations of inequality. Even though different levels of state support is provided for arts education, project funding is primarily given to projects that affirm or reproduce the existing cultural or the educational sector. Transformative projects, as the good practices presented, are still an exception. In Turkey, in turn, there's nowadays a lack of public support for arts education programs, wherefore many of the NGOs orient their activities towards the interest of international donors and the private sector. One of my co-fellows, Ellen Collender, highlights here that these tendencies have led to an increased legitimization of success and quality in the field with statistics and figures, which results again in the primary orientation of the NGOs or civil society actors' educational activities towards the large population of Syrian refugees and the exclusion of non-Syrian children and young people in informal education. So in both countries, on the one hand, there is an expansion of measures and arts. No, next slide, yes. So the conclusion is that in both countries, on the one hand, there is an expansion of measures and arts education programs that aim to facilitate the refugees' children, social educational integration, but still in order to promote diversity-aware and inclusive community building processes on the ground and not let them stagnate at a symbolic level, it is relevant to overcome those underlying conditions and founding logics which make the civil society actors incapable of acting sustainably and also of multiplying.
Thank you very much. Ruth, your turn.
Yes, thank you very much for being with you here and for all the visitors joining our session. May I shortly introduce myself? I'm university professor at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna in Austria and Europe. And actually we educate artist teachers or we are involved in teacher education for secondary schools, but we also have a big focus on collaborating with people with various impairments, but also with refugees. But the project I will present today is about dementia. Our project is called Demet Arts. Currently, more than 55 million people have dementia worldwide. Over 60% of whom live in low and middle income countries, and every year there are nearly 10 million new cases. Although there have been few medical successes to date, one thing is certain: art contributes to well-being. We are the Artistic Research Project is funded by the Austrian Research Fund. You can find the DOI and find us also. And what is very important to let you know that we work with different target groups. So we work with people with dementia, we work with people in the caregiving area and also with relatives. And we work interdisciplinary, for example, with musicians or with the University of Music and Performative Arts. And we work, and when we entered the project, actually we were the only project worldwide, as far as we know, who engaged with art and people with dementia with the youth, because ageism is rising and we need to inform the youth and make them empathic towards the older generations. Next slide, please. Yes, so what is artistic research in our country? So there is a special funding for artistic research. So there are a few projects I will show to you. On the left side, you can see one of a very young student. She's pre-bachelor and she engaged in the research project, and she collaborated with a person with early dementia, Parkinson dementia. And she did a graphic novel, and it's very unique because there is no participatory graphic novel done yet in the world. So it's very special. Or you can see it's Lisa Kielmeyer, or you can see Pia Schala. So one of her projects is at a table where you can interact with people with dementia in a higher degree of stadium. And so children can go to meet their grandma or grandpa and interact with them when it's difficult to talk. Or also another student in the 5th semester, and she focused on how can you show the different phases of dementia through paintings. So the more and more is erased, unfortunately, in your brain. On the right side, you can see the Archive of Confusion, which I gathered from Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Canada. And for people between 3 and 103 years old, people with and without dementia. And as you can see, we have quite a lot of approaches. Next slide, please. So we go into schools and we talk with children about what is happening, but we also go to the public space and involve people discussing about what dementia means and how you can take care of people with dementia. On the left side, you see different walkers. This is also something we found out, that you actually most people who should use a walker or a rollator, they don't like to use it because it's not individualized and it's not designed. So of course, these are not to be used, but these express the wishes of people with dementia, which they told us, that they want to have, if you get older or if you get an illness, you have the right to participate in our society and you have the right to design, to have a nice design. We also did a book. It's about arts and dementia, which you can buy at the Gruyter, and it's about dementia care and arts all over the world. And what is maybe also important, that we developed a so-called tool book where you can find different workshops which we tested with different target groups, and you can download for free. So thank you very much for listening, and I will pass over to the next.
Good day, everyone. My name is Melanie Sarantou. I'm from Kyushu University. I'm a professor in social design. Although I've been working in the AMAS project for 3 years, working with ITAC, so the first video you saw, I actually want to discuss the outflow of the AMAS project, and talking basically about the Trust project, which was with an Indigenous community in South Australia, in a very, very remote small town of Serduna. In this specific project, we looked at using educational tools and arts-based methods to engage with local community and really look a little bit critically at the role of narrativity and the role stories play in these communities. So this specific group engaged with felt making, and in the felt making, working with Australian merino wool. Really, they transferred their cultural stories within these artifacts. Hence, questions came up. For example, how can we involve stakeholders in creating fair digital legal frameworks for Indigenous cultural heritage through arts-based methods and education? So in the next slide, please, we will see that it is not always as straightforward. Can you change to the next slide? Thank you. It is not always as straightforward as we think to make artifacts and then also tell the stories about what are embedded in those artifacts. In the previous slide, you can see that one of the elders, Jenny Gray, for example, was telling about her experience in this project, where the archival practices that were explained to her, how to use her mobile phone, for example, to document her own art making, telling her stories, but that she did not have to necessarily share these stories, but rather make a personal archive, was really meaningful to her. And this is what stories can reveal in living cultural heritage contexts, how they can become personally meaningful to the participants in research. Then the challenges was that by digitizing the traditional and digitally born cultural assets, the values of these Indigenous people's heritage materials can be fully recognized and promoted on the one side. However, there were concerns in these communities, how, for example, living cultural heritage was making or became available publicly online by sharing, for example, through social media, instead of just keeping their personal and very special and very private cultural stories to, in their own personal archives. And then, of course, the fear of commercialization, exploitation via the internet was a real fear for this community. And then we also need to keep in mind that sharing stories online and narrative practices are not always the choice of all Indigenous communities. They are not necessarily willing to participate in all these practices, and they want to be able to choose in which of these practices they do participate. Thank you very much. To the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you for all of us. So in this first panel, we got a glimpse of cultural and artistic education project linked to the themes of reconciliation, decolonization, social inclusion, social care, and mental health care. All these projects are conceived as agents of social change through dialogue and activism. A number of professionals and participants surround these projects, demonstrating the complementary contribution of each, whether technical, cultural, or social, through the diversity of voices. In a holistic sense, art becomes a way of giving meaning to the common, to everyday life, of carrying the voices of those who are in the banks of hegemonies and re-establishing the essence of each individual, deconstructing certain excluding vision and transforming what's make up humanity in our societies. In this second panel, we will focus on the humanitarian field, that's of emergency and development, but also on conflict zones and the issues of education, health, and well-being through arts, through culture and artistic education that runs in crisis zones. The second panel brings together humanitarian professionals working with international organizations and NGOs in the field. Through their eyes, we'll hear just how much support humanitarian interventions today needs to integrate artistic practices into their various projects. I will start by outlining some of the global issues at stake, then give you an overview of the type of programs deployed by humanitarian actors, and then I will give the voice to Diane Durand, who will discuss the challenges encountered in implementing artistic projects in Syria. Then Florence will present humanitarian principles and the issue of artistic expression in conflict situations. Manon will talk about the importance of MHPSS, mental health and psychosocial support, illustrating this through some artistic projects which can be carried out. Then Ismail will show us artistic activities in the context of non-formal education and some of the issues encountered in camps in Iraq. And finally, Livia Otal will talk about the challenges of artistic projects to strengthen the segregated community of Nadezhda and Steven. So for my part, we can go to the next slide. I wanted to outline some figures, some important figures, which make sense when we talk about the humanitarian needs in conflict and displacement situation. So there are over 110 million people in forced displacement nowadays. 71 million people are internally displaced person in 2022, plus 20% compared to 2021. There are 142 million children worldwide who are growing up in conflict settings, and 460 million children worldwide who are affected by conflict, displacement, or instability. It was important for us to make those figures out and to a little bit introduce the humanitarian field. So the humanitarian actions aims to reduce long-term vulnerability and increase people's capacities through a continuum of actions. It's important to say that there is the emergency relief operations, which deal with the immediate needs, but should also find ways to boost resilience to future crises and providing long-term development benefits and strengthening risk management. And this continuum, it's called the linking relief, rehabilitation, and development. So we think that to act, to help, to make people less suffer, we need to collaborate until the end, until the development process. Next slide, please. In those programs, there is arts. We can see a lot of programs, including arts in their daily practices. So why use the art in the humanitarian programs? About the artistic programs in the humanitarian field, first, we can see that there is a scientific literature and great literature testify to the use of all artistic disciplines, but more often, visual art, theater, and music. The NGOs organize artistic practices on a daily basis in their activities with children. You will see some examples through our speakers. And we should say today also that not all practices of education in and through arts are inherently good. Goals, practices, and processes, the type of guidance to are essential and to be conducted by trained educators. About the recognition of the benefits, we have a lot of testimonies, and we have a lot of literature, as I said. So in some case, the artistic programs in the humanitarian field can improve well-being of the participants. The effective expression of emotion and thoughts in a singular way. You can express things that you can't express in another way, but by heart, it's easier. It can also promote a sense of belonging to a community, control, and structures. It can help to them to reaffirm their identity and mobilize their hope. And also, it can reduce the anxiety symptoms of the children after art intervention. Also, some researchers and some NGOs show that there are stronger social and emotional skills and improvement in verbal and artistic expression and emotional regulation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to define or to have a global view on all this big field, and we try to develop two different approaches in the humanitarian field when we use the arts. First is the artistic programs with the health approach. There are a lot of medical NGOs and psychosocial programs, and Manon, for example, Diane also, our speakers will talk about that. So in this category, there are a lot of art-based psychological and psychiatric programs. For example, about the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. There are also the psychosocial support programs, and we'll see that there are different ways to see that and different way to conduct. It depends on the professional. There are also art therapy programs, and we see, for example, in Ukraine that there are a lot of initiatives in this sense. And in another side, there are the artistic programs with a cultural approach. And there are a lot of practices too for informal and non-formal education programs, including education through arts and also social-emotional learning. There are a lot of programs on social-emotional learning using arts. Also, some programs, it's less in humanitarian field, but there are links, there are connections in peacekeeping and peace building for reconciliation and anti-violence programs. And also the awareness and information programs, for example, in protection, and it's in all the humanitarian sector for agents to send some messages. I added something I wanted to add, that those two categories are also connected, because an NGO can have different type of programs, can do psychosocial support through education, etc. So it was just for you to have a clear view, but of course, everything it's a little bit connected. So we can hear our speakers now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Albane. So my name is Diane Durand. I have been involved in humanitarian project management for over a decade, primarily with small to medium-sized NGOs. I start my career as an emergency logistician and gradually transitioned into project management in conflict zones, concentrating on the capacity building initiative for NGOs and partners from the Global South. Specifically, my focus has been on education and psychosocial support activities for children in peril in the Middle East and Africa. So for more than 5 years, I have been working with Solinfo, that means Solidarité, Intervention and Formation, a French NGO dedicated to education programs. In my role, I developed an artistic mediation program and visual art workshop for vulnerable children in Syria. So today I will discuss the challenge and the practical application of the psychological support program developed in this setting. So Solinfo initiated emergency psychosocial support activities through artistic mediation in the rest of Syria in 2012. At the request of, let's say, overwhelmed local association and structures witnessing children's significant psychological vulnerability due to the conflict. So we start from a simple observation that children must remain children, shielded from adult violence and provided with the space for expression and creation where they can live their childhood and manage their intense emotions. And this leads to the creation of the Colorful Syria program. Since we couldn't find a competent local professional in child psychology and art therapy, we prioritized the training school teacher in psychosocial approach to artistic mediation. These teachers were accustomed to work with children and already had, let's say, pedagogical knowledge. So it really is crucial for Solinfo that our facilitators and animators can connect with the children beyond their artistic skills. We organized emergency artistic mediation workshop for children aged 6 to 12, mainly focusing on visual art for 3 reasons. First, the ease with which children can engage with such material. Second, local availability of material, of course. And third, the ease of implementation of such activity for our facilitators who aren't necessarily artists and may not always approach things, let's say, creatively. So apart from this challenge of finding and training local staff in a crisis context while ensuring children safety and logistical support for our workshop. One major difficulty I encountered in implementing and developing psychosocial support program in the rest of Syria was obtaining administration approval from these educational activities. So let's remember that in a region striving for independence and cultural preservation, navigating, let's say, this delicate situation was quite challenging. The local authorities were understandably cautious about external involvement in matters deeply connected to education and children's well-being, reflecting ongoing efforts to safeguard cultural identity and a pursuit of autonomy. So therefore, beyond establishing a trusting and a collaborative relationship between Solinfo team, local partners, and the administrative representatives, we focused on integrating cultural identity, folklore, and tradition activity into our artistic workshop. Today, Solinfo continues its intervention in the rest of Syria, where the conflict persists, albeit less visibly. Our emergency psychosocial support workshops on mediation dedicated to managing intense emotion have evolved into a development program in partnership with local NGOs. This program now emphasizes children personal development and identity construction through visual art workshop and extracurricular activities, including sport and outdoor activity. So to conclude, and as Albane already said, it's important to note that beyond the challenges encountered, the practical application of the psychological support program can and must evolve and adapt to the changing intervention context. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you very much. Now we'll hear Florence try to talk about the humanitarian principle and the arts.
Humanity, we know it's the human suffering that needs to be addressed wherever it's found. And the purpose of humanitarian action with the humanity principle is to protect life and health and ensure respect for the human being. And art can be a key aspect of humanity because it has been used through war by different individuals, people that have been suffering through different text, poem, sometimes video, and other form of books, drawing, which everyone has seen and has used because it speaks better when it is people experiencing the pain. It appeals to our common sense, I would say, and meaning of life. I think art may be a way to show humanity in challenging time, to be able to express in another way the unspeakable and denounce it to other human beings so they could stand against the humanity of others. However, then it comes to the impartiality principle. Obviously, impartiality means that we need to not discriminate on the basis of nationality, race, gender, religious belief, etc. Sometimes when it comes to denunciation of some conflicts, of things that could amount to genocide or other war crime, we often see this question related to neutrality, but that can also come into impartiality. How can suffering of different nations that are fighting according to international human rights law can be depicted in an impartial way through art? Because we know that at some point we will be using the art of one community member that may belong to one person that is considered by a party of the conflict as an enemy, and then on the other side by someone else who is considered, an ally. How do humanitarians make the decision to use art? So usually you will see that most humanitarians won't use those forms of art that are coming from the community themselves during the conflict itself, maybe afterwards, but not during the conflict itself, just to be able to access each community. So usually humanitarians will use rather art to illustrate some very complex principles. For instance, the humanitarian principles that I'm talking about now. For instance, what is statelessness? What is logistic in humanitarian action? Things like this, just to illustrate what we do. Because then you don't take side, you just illustrate what humanitarians are doing. However, I still think suffering and testimony through art could be a good way to engage further donors, actors into the humanitarian cause, because then you see and you show the voices of those that may need it the most. So then let's talk about neutrality. Usually neutrality is defined as humanitarian actors must not take side in hostility or engage in controversies of political, racial, religious, or ideological nature. Due to what we explained earlier, conflict can still be extremely political. Peace can be considered extremely political too. And humanitarian actors are expected not to take side and discuss with all parties within the conflict. And if using art to be neutral maybe there would be a need to have an equal art depicting one side and then another art coming from the other community to depict the other. However, we know that during conflict, art can be also used as propaganda to promote war, maybe urge communities to sacrifice themselves, their family, with like a strong depiction of the enemy. So if we use this art, then we won't be neutral. I think that basically reducing civilian suffering is the aim of humanitarian action. So peace might be more controversial to use. Art is therefore more often used in the way of reconciliation, but I still think that we need to have this discussion towards the link between neutrality and art.
It was an overview from Florence, so thank you to her. And now we listen Manon.
Hi everyone, greetings from Amman, where I'm sitting right now. I'm a clinical psychologist, but I've been working in the humanitarian sector since many years in different crises and contexts. And I would like to take some minutes with you to talk about mental health and psychosocial support, and especially around crisis and emergency. I think we can all witness today that crisis keeps increasing, the number of them, and they are like lasting longer and longer. That is really depressing, in my opinion. So all this crisis around the world is impacting the well-being of individuals due to many factors such as displacements, loss, stress, or horrific experience that they can face on a daily basis. It's important to remind us that the World Health Organization, WHO, has only defined mental health in 2001, so like 22 years ago, and maybe some of you in the audience are even younger than this definition that have been officially published. It's defined by the state of well-being of which every individual realizes potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make contribution to the community. The humanitarian sector, as you can see, is evolving very, very quickly since many years. That is great. And we have been able to see the first mental and psychosocial program in 2007 through any type of local and outside support that can protect and promote psychosocial well-being, but as well prevent and treat mental disorder. And we had amazing examples from colleagues today showcasing that. Before, why I'm talking about all of that, I just wanted to raise your attention on the latest targets and data from WHO on mental health that are really, really worrying, in my opinion. 1 billion of people are living with mental disorder, including 14% of the adolescents at this in 2020. Depression and anxiety rose by 25% since COVID, and 71% of people with psychosis worldwide do not receive any care. It is super alarming, and despite all of that, the level of public expenditure remains really, really low, especially on low-income countries. Less than 1% of the world aid goes to mental health, and only 25% of the WHO member states are integrating mental health into primary care. Next slide, please. So what we can do to overcome this challenge, we need to ensure, and let me admit someone at the same time I'm admitting colleagues in the room, sorry for that. So what we need to do is to ensure provision of this mental health and psychosocial services to populations that are affected, but as well ensuring access of it. I'm talking about physical access and all the logistic issues that have been mentioned by Diane just before, and to ensure integration of these services in the primary care. You maybe wonder why I'm talking about MHPSS in an arts panel. That is super amazing to be there, just because arts can play a really big role in terms of preventing and promoting some good practice and mental health and well-being for every individual, but as well in the management and treatment of some of the disorder. Next slide, please. I will take the last 2 minutes to more like showcase like practical where I've been using arts in different countries. It's the same. So I've been deployed like few years ago in Central African Republic that is facing a long-lasting crisis that is fully forgotten by the media as today, that no one is talking about, but people are really facing a lot of challenges. I have been deployed for a medical organization responsible to lead the MHPSS department, and then realizing after doing some assessment and understanding a bit more where I was sitting at this time of my life, that mental health was highly stigmatized and stereotyped by communities. And then people who were facing some challenges where I have no idea on what to do and where to face, and they were fully afraid of like other community members about what to do. So you can see on the left side, that is a flyer that have been developed through a community-based approach with some like local partners and youth people and women that we have been using to integrate in our program to develop with a drawing, like with a local artist, some like key one pages in local languages, of course, that to promote some mental health awareness. So like the key message are maybe like mental health is concerning all of us. Feeling unwell does not mean to be weak. Do not stay alone. Come to talk to a psychosocial worker. And of course, you have all the data on where to find some services. On the right side, sorry, it's a theater representation. So we have been working again with a group of youth leader and community leader with a local theater group to have like some theater role or plays on 3 different types of sensitization, one on mental health, one on GBV, gender-based violence, and one on like early pregnancy that were like just rooting in the different villages where we were used to have like activities around and gather community to respond to their question and sensitize them. I can leave to the next speakers.
Yes, Ayada, it's your turn. We can't hear you, Ayad. Are you there?
Hello, Albane. Okay, thank you very much. I am Ayad. I am an activity designer and facilitator in non-formal education program in Iraq. I am working in IDPS camps with Yazidi people. Here I gonna present sometimes about the arts, how it plays a virtual role in addressing various challenges and promoting holistic development among the displacement population inside the camps. And I will talking about the non-formal education activities and how it is mixed with the art too. In this slide, we can see about many of the IDPs displaced population often face challenge in managing their cultural and identity minds appeal, but arts allows them to express their cultural heritage through traditional crafts or music or dance or storytelling. Next, please, for the next slide, if we can. And many individuals inside the camps have experienced traumatic events, including displacement, violence, and loss, but arts provides them a therapeutic or outlet for them to express their emotion, fears, and hopes in a safe, in non-therapeutic manner, as we've seen in these activities too. For the next slide, please. And we are working with developing skills, arts, facilitate education faster to development of various skills, including such as communication or integration, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, and cooperation and teamwork. These skills are essential for them to holistic development for individual, particularly of contexts where formal education may be limited from and codable from them. For that, we designed many activities of art activities to cover this part for them, such as we are working with the children, especially, and with the women and teenagers inside the camps. And we for especially, we are focusing on capacity building too, and about the community building and social integration. Art initiatives bring people together, fostering of a sense of community and social cohesion within IDPS camps. Cooperative arts projects such as non-formal education encourage teamwork, cooperation, mutual respect among participants, regardless for the age or gender or ethnicity. Thank you, Albane. For the next one.
Yes. Hello, I'm Livia Otal. I know that we don't have much time, so I will try to be very brief. It's been almost 20 years that I work in social and humanitarian field, mostly in health, but also education and integration. It's been only recently, I can say, that I discovered how to work and use art in the humanitarian work. So I will explain you a little bit. I will give the example of Nadezhda, which is a segregated neighborhood in Bulgaria, in Europe, in the European Union even. So this neighborhood that you can see the pictures up there, it is segregated, perceived as Roma. As you know, Roma, it's a very big minority and very discriminated in Europe. So this neighborhood is more and more ghettoized by the attitudes and the neglect of the authorities. It is surrounded by a wall, as you can see, cut from the city by railways, and there are only two entries. One entry that gives outside the city and one entry that is after the railways, with a linked with the city with a tunnel, which you can see in the down photos. So what we started working, it was bringing art into connecting the community through the drawings that you can see, through the work on the tunnel, with the artists from outside the minority. This brought a lot of joy and light and connection, actually, from both communities. Next slide, please. One other consequence of this segregation is also the vulnerability. So I won't go into the details, but this vulnerability makes the children and the women even more vulnerable, because in this neighborhood there was British pedophile that abused for years and years the children. So we used art in order to, as a tool of psychosocial support for the children, victims or not, but to be more closer to them and to give them the possibility to express themselves without words. And next slide, because we'll really go very fast. Also, I wanted to remark that the community building is also another result, because it brings people together. It creates community there where there is not usually, through the artistic projects, whatever they are, because it attracts children, it attracts the parents, it attracts professionals from outside the community, and it attracts even the other inhabitants of the city. So all the good conclusions about using arts, and yes, I think we need to speak more and to have more support. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we all can see we're running slightly over time. So Albane and I can try and just be incredibly brief in summing up. What does all of this point to? What is the larger conversation at play here before we leave the call open, as promised, for a little Q&A with some of our speakers? I know there are other events, so please do run off to those if you need to. But I think the big question is, with all of this being said, with all of this activity and this amazing practice and this breadth of place, topic, art form, what are the big takeaways that we want to leave you with from this session? And I think there are four. I'll introduce two, and Albane, you can take the last couple. But Arts for Social Change is a diverse experience in a wide range of contexts. Arts, when shaped and applied by communities and guided by teaching artists and other professionals, can be a powerful vehicle for respect for human rights. It can help to address current challenges facing our societies, and as you've heard, there are many. The second is to allow us to do this work effectively, an awareness of the power of these artistic and cultural initiatives carried out by collectives, NGOs, institutions, citizens. They have to be recognized and they have to be reinforced. Recognition must be present at all different levels, community, right up to UNESCO and culture ministers, so that solutions and support can be holistic, inclusive, and political. This work needs tangible support with plans and roadmaps. It's no longer enough to say that they're important. They must be supported with plans and resources in a thought-out, cohesive way at an international level. And certainly, ITAC and everyone on this call is excited, available, willing to offer further insights and guidance about how this might happen. Albane?
Thank you so much, Madeleine. And yes, I will add things, but I totally agree with it, and we are all agree. And I think you who are with us are totally agreed too. So the practice is based on evidence, and the evidence is based on practice. Even if they are regularly documented by research, by you, by stakeholders. I saw in the chat, yes, we are a lot doing that. But it must be capitalized overall at an international scales, and also taking in account by the donors. Those proofs needs to be capitalized in the humanitarian field, in particular in emergency and in armed conflict and post-conflict settings. This capitalization work need to be done to understand, to have better view, to understand what is working in those programs, because we don't have a clear view, we don't know. And so we make a kind of bricolage, and we need to build it more stronger. It seems essential to us also to associate a little bit, as we said, everyone, to associate different actors in these common artistic issues, not to be only a tool, to be central. To associate, we said a little bit, the state services, the international organizations, the NGOs, the communities, and maybe to them first, and the civil society actors in different times. We spoke a lot about the crisis and the conflict, but in our everyday lives, to understand how it works and which type of messages, of values that we want to create all together. And also for the people who are a little bit in the margins, as we said, to have a means for expression and dialogue, reconstruction in the long term, and for peace. I just wanted to remind you that there are many humanitarian professionals, as we a little bit saw, that works on artistic and cultural education, even teachers in formal education at schools who are impacted by the conflict, and still have some students who are also impacted in the conflict. So maybe they need some also support from the institutions, and also in psychosocial support or social emotional learning, depends on the situation in the field. So we need more guidance, and we need also to have specific programs. We need specific programs to connect it. We talk a lot. If you see in the conference, the World Conference for Art, Culture and Art Education with now and also in the coming days, there are a lot of people talking about well-being, arts. But now let's make it together. And this table, we have not a lot of time to express. 5 minutes is short, but we need all together, even if we have just 5 minutes to be here together. So a consideration and strengthening all those skills seems to be essential for us in those different fields that we represent. I would like to thank you so much, everyone who is attending our conference, but also and the speakers for what they are doing every day, and also to join the team. And I hope we'll have other opportunities altogether. So I think it's time for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much. We have overrun, and so if people need to dash off and attend other sessions, please feel free. But if you want to stick around and ask some questions and answers, we're able to leave the call open for 10 or 15 minutes more. So please feel free to either raise your hand virtually, write something in the chat, or unmute and let us know who and what your question is.
I think we can also add that we will send the recording of this session later on, and also some resources, complementary resources from our speakers if you want to go further on what they say. I saw some LinkedIn contact, maybe some questions. What do you think, Madeleine?
Yes, I see a question in the chat, which maybe can get us started. But for anyone else, please feel free to raise your hand virtually via Zoom, or just unmute and go for it if you're feeling brave. But the question that I think I would offer to the panel from the chat from Pierre asks a practical question. Former active humanitarian and now artist myself, please point me to concrete potential funding contacts, UNESCO or others, for a programme linking art and humanitarian action that I have developed. So I don't know if anyone on the panel is particularly well versed in this. I can offer my 2 cents, which is that funding is very, very, very hard to come by. And that's one of probably what you got from my 2 cents, is that what there needs to be more than a recognition that this is good and worthwhile is tangible funding streams and partnership brokerages that can put artists and activists in touch with places who are looking to implement creative engagement processes. I personally don't know any funder that I could recommend for you that you could approach that would do that. And I run ITAC, so that in itself is a pretty specific gap, an issue, which I think we are all coming together to try and suggest ought to be changed and needs to be changed pretty urgently given the state of humanitarian crises. Would anyone like to add?
It's just quickly, but it depends on many things, and the donors are not the same. If you are a big international NGOs, recognized, some people here are working for NGOs who have big fundings. Actually, you know USAID or even ECHO from the European Union. So there are some big funders, but there are also small foundations. It depends where you are, also which regions. But there are some European also funding where you can collaborate with associations, and also it's very it depends.
Okay. No one else has anything else to add. We've also had a question from Jackie. As a researcher in this space, I was wondering if there are networks, ITAC is an amazing one, thank you, where I can connect with other practitioners, people working in this space. Teresa, are you still on this call?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry about the noise.
That's okay. Did you hear that question from Jackie that's in the chat about international networks? Because I feel you're very well placed to answer that if you heard that.
Well, about which international network exists. So Madeleine already told you about ITAC. It's a huge international network. It's really great for people that are interested in social change and the art education for social change. This is one network I really recommend. And also we have INSEA for visual arts. INSEA network is an international society for education through art, and is mainly for visual art education. For music education, we have Ismail, International Music Education. And for theater, you have IDEA. I can write to you in the chat the links. So IDEA is more for drama teachers, drama education. And for dance, you have the World Dance Alliance, or DASI. DASI is based in Australia and is dance for children. So this is the main huge networks around the world for art education. I will write the links in the chat if you want.
Great, thank you, Teresa. Are there any other questions from the room? If not, we can close early, but please feel free to take this as an informal moment to voice whatever is percolating. Okay, if there are no more questions, I think what we will do is take this as an opportunity to end the session, but I'll leave the call open for maybe 30 more seconds so that you have a chance to save the chat. You should be able to right-click on the 3 dots and save the chat. Lots of people have prompted you to connect with them on LinkedIn or shared resources or follow-ups. So if you want to do that, this is your moment to save that so you have the details to follow up about. Otherwise, it just remains for us to say another massive, massive thank you to our speakers. 5 minutes is not an easy task when you're out there changing the world. So thank you very much for taking that on and helping us give these snapshots from across the field. I'll leave those extra 20 seconds open now, but with that being said, thank you everyone for attending. I hope to see some of you next week at the conference, but for everyone else, you have our emails and please feel free to be in touch. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.